JT, I've been looking forward to this. I was lucky enough to speak to a good friend of yours, Brian from Demon Erasers. But yeah, no, I saw you guys collab a lot. Whenever I speak to someone, I do try my best to get as much research on them as I can. I find you're this great combo of religion, history, and maybe most importantly, conspiracies.
Yeah, that's pretty fair. I would say that I always kind of describe myself as like a jack of all trades, master of none. So I know a little bit about a lot, but yeah, most importantly, yeah, I'm a Christ believer, Christ follower. So I mean, like I try to everything that I kind of see in the world, I interpret it through that lens of like I believe that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. And then you think about like you have in like the biblical story, you have like this polarity between like you have the light side and then you have the dark side. And so everything seems to make sense to me when you kind of phrase it like that. God's a God of order. The devil can only do certain things. So then you think about like that things are not all coincidences. Things have a rhyme and a reason. And I think that makes sense to me.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. And maybe someone who's atheist and someone who's maybe on the left, they'll just look at that and like, no, that's too simplistic. Things aren't black and white. And it's like, actually, a lot of stuff are. I mean, you're always going to get the outliers. There's always going to be an anomaly or whatever. But for the bulk of things, we should be able to call a spade and be like, actually, yeah, no, that's a little bit evil. And that shouldn't be a bad thing to say.
Well, I mean, I think that is. It's like, well, yeah, there's black and white, but I mean, I think that we're kind of in the area of the shades of gray, like where the people who really don't understand. But when you do kind of see like the elites and like the factions that seem to not have our best interests in mind, and people think it's these are all coincidences. It's like, no, you can kind of see if you zoom out and you see like the last couple hundred years, you see like they've been openly talking about what they've been moving this place toward. So when then when you see world changing events, and then people try to make it sound like these were just accidents or tragedies, and you're just like, no, there's a pattern here, and if you haven't seen the pattern, it's because you don't want to see the pattern.
Yeah, willfully ignorant, willfully blind. And I mean, I talk about it on the show quite a lot, but I think there's just so many things which you can point and are objectively bad. Because I mean, that's the thing that we should always strive for, right? Objectively true things. And you're right, it is more of a shade of gray, but I generally think there's like, you're like, okay, objectively speaking, this is more true than the other, right? Like when you look at feminism, and I think, okay, it had some ideas at the start. Maybe you could say that was good, but now it's just completely just continued and on and on. And one of the biggest things it pushes is her body, her choice. So then when you're looking at 1 million abortions a year, it's like, again, like objectively speaking, how can we say this is okay?
Right. Well, it's funny if you look historically, back in the day, they kind of said that they wanted them accessible but rare. Like they didn't want people to be aborting their babies, right? And then now it's like a sacred cow. It's like literally one of their sacraments. It's like you can't take this away. We want as much as we can. And as you were saying though, that just the whole idea of like my body, my choice. Well, of course, except for when it's a pandemic, and obviously then it's not our choices even if it is our own bodies. But I think that even that concept is kind of like my body, my choice, and it makes me think of like my truth. So this is my truth, and that's your truth, and so we can't argue about that. But truth comes from God. If you believe in a God, the truth comes from a higher place. So we cannot change the truth to whatever we want it to be. There's things that are objectively true and objectively false. And if you don't believe that, yeah, then of course you have like moral relativism, and then like we're just animals and all this kind of stuff, and then you lead to like a just moral decay. It's like if you do believe in there's something higher than us, well, it does actually make you think like we're accountable at the end of the day. Like I believe that that's kind of what it means when God created us in his image. It's like he's given us a conscience, he's given us similar emotions to him. And so we can objectively know something is right and wrong without ever being told. It's kind of like torturing puppies. It's like would you have to be told that that's wrong? That kind
Right.
of a thing, like
Right.
where we would automatically know that there's something not right about this. I don't like this. And I
Yeah.
think that is something that obviously the evolutionary paradigm does not really explain, is like why can we all know that there's right and wrongs. We might not always agree about what's right and wrong, but we all have this sense of like what's just and what's not just. And so I think that really comes from our creator. And I think, yeah, that this is what you get when people decide what they want to manipulate the truth to suit themselves, versus like what truth actually should do is that it should change you. We need to change based on what we know to be true, not the other way around.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. And it reminds me of that whole is to an ought problem, right? So
Hmm.
if you believe in God, if you believe that we're made in His image, you automatically assume that everyone has a moral value. So if I am going to take someone's life, I am committing a moral sin, right? If I
Hmm.
truly believe in God, I assume that doing that is a mortal sin. If you're someone who's atheist and you don't believe in God, you can say that you're a morally good person. The issue they have is, how do you justify it? If there's no God, then there's no meaning. It doesn't really make a difference if someone's killed, if a million people are killed. You can't justify your actions. And I think this is, I'm kind of on this journey as well. And Christianity for me makes the most sense. But when you do start to look at things in that lens, it's made life for me so much easier. COVID is such a great example as well. It kind of, yeah, I mean, like everyone's scared, but it showed how evil things were straight away, and it made
Hmm.
everything so much more real. It showed me how quick people were to kind of bend the knee to authority, and I mean, it went either way, didn't it? It either woke people up and realized like, okay, shit, no, we've got to stand strong, we've got to kind of push back against this, or it revealed just how quick people were to follow this kind of thing.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that year certainly changed me. That radicalized me big time. I think I was always kind of a skeptical person. I really didn't trust the government and the news and all that kind of stuff, but never more so than that year, when I was just like, I was so disillusioned, because that's a time where I was like living on Twitter, not posting as much, but mostly just reading the news coming out of the East, and hearing how the things were kind of moving across the world, and
Sure.
really kind of looking into it. And at the time, I was really into like endurance sports, so I was like in the best shape of my whole life. So I remember when the illness was passing through, and I remember seeing like who was mostly were susceptible to this. I remember thinking like, well, I'm not really worried about it, and I thought maybe it's not that big a deal. And then people are going to realize it's not that big a deal, because the mortality rates in China and stuff were not really that bad. And I thought, okay. I remember when Trump shut down the government for 2 weeks, or the country for 2 weeks, or whatever, and I thought, I bet she's going to lift it before 2 weeks. I bet she's going to realize that it's really not that big a deal. And of course, if I've ever been wrong about something, that's probably the wrongest I've ever been.
Yeah,
but I
yeah,
but I
yeah.
was thinking like, but I was looking at, based on the evidence, like of what was taking place, I thought that they would have our best interests in mind. But I mean, I think that, again, that was probably one of the red pills. That was a situation where this was a horrible time. And
Yeah.
yeah, lots of us had decided at this point, we cannot trust the experts. We cannot always trust the quote unquote science about all these things, because these people really don't care about us. And then, of course, we had an election in 2020 here. And of course, a lot of us believe that the results might have been skewed. And so that whole thing. And then I went through like a personal crisis in 2021. And all that led me to just basically just get on my knees saying, like, I can't handle this place anymore. This place is just sick. Nobody cares what's true. I really just want to know what's true. And I think at that point I really started to read my Bible again, and I started to research all the other quote unquote conspiracies, because I was like, well, if they're lying about this, like what else have they lied about? And then I still have not got to the bottom of that, because it's that question that was haunting me. And it was interesting, because my brother at the time, he had been going down the rabbit hole for quite a few years before. And I remember he would always kind of like hint at stuff to me, but I was really like, I guess I had a pretty good life from like, all things considered. And I really didn't want those conspiracies to be real. I couldn't like debunk it, but it was more like, nah. But why does it matter to me? And it's interesting if you really think about that question. It's like, so why did those conspiracies matter? Well, because there was going to be a new one. It was going to matter. And it is kind of like the idea that if you let them kind of get away, or at least not openly talk about it, well, then more people are likely to fall for the next one. And obviously the one that took place, 5 years ago changed the world completely. And yeah, and some things, and I believe obviously this is one of my life verses, is Romans 8:28, is God can use all things together for the good for those who love him and are called to his purpose. So like that terrible time in my life ended up being the point where it really changed me for the better, because I was aware. And of course, it did take a process of grieving and the sickness and all the anger. But then when you get to the other side of it and you're like, okay, God says it'll be okay if I just trust him. That gave me a whole different perspective, and it took the anxiety away from me about all the things that I was concerned about. Because if you really think about it, like God almost had to just tell me, those things you're worried about, they're likely going to take place at some point. You know what I mean? Like nobody gets out of this place alive, right? Like the things you're worried about eventually will catch up to you. So, but what if they do? Like, what then? And I think it's kind of like, well, like I said, if you trust in God, it's like, well, we believe in something more than this, so it'll be okay. And so then you get into the idea of like what's true, and there's worse things than death. There's things of being, of basically just forsaking what God has called you to do, and treating other people poorly and things like that. It's like dying without honor and with greed and all that. That's way worse than just death.
Yeah. I mean, like I'm actually incredibly lucky to do these kind of podcasts, not just talking to people like yourself, but there's some other Christians I spoke to from the UK. This guy, Bob of Speaker's Corner, and he says how it is a literal sin to be a coward. It's a literal sin.
Yeah,
right?
It says in the book of Revelation, it talks about people who are not going to enter the heavenly gates. Cowards are not entering.
Yeah, and when I could see everything which was happening with COVID, it genuinely made me feel like I was forced to do this. Like, even if I could convince one other person not to take an experimental drug, or maybe just to do a little bit of research despite what the experts tell you, I would have considered that a win, right? But I think you are, when you do start to lean more into religion. I mean, this is the thing with people who are atheists, right? When the pressure gets put onto them, if you truly believe this is your one and only life, you're going to be fearful if you lose that, right?
Oh, it's so bleak. It's such a bleak outlook. Is that yeah, right. And I said, I think that's interesting why the Bible tells you over and over again to not be afraid. And it's like but yeah, you're right. If you believe that this is all there is, well, then you would try to do all you can to hang on to it.
Yeah.
And of course, I think that is absolutely what we saw in 2021. We saw people being led by fear, not by rationality, not by the science, but they were being pushed by fear. And I think that obviously exposed basically the whole game plan of the enemy to us.
Yeah, exactly. And that leans even more into why you shouldn't be afraid. Because one, if you do, you're going to get led down the wrong path. And two, if you stand your ground, you can at least be proud of yourself. You can, even if it all goes bad, right? You'll be remembered in a better way, which, like you say, none of us are getting out of this alive. I'd rather hold my head high knowing that I've done that, right? And also, like, we're having all these different cultures kind of flood the West right now. And all things said and done, I know Brian has, he looks at all the religions have just been corrupted in some shape or form, but there's goodness in all of them. And I can agree with that to a point. But if you were an atheist person up against someone of Islam, the person of Islam loves their faith so much, they will die for their faith. So if you're put into a situation where you either have to bend to their will, or like, or you what? You're gonna die for something that you don't even believe in? No, you're probably gonna bend a knee, And this is the power of religion. This is the power of Christianity, really.
Well, I mean, I would say that all religions obviously would have some kind of a morality base. Well, like, I mean, just, most of them do, anyways. Maybe one doesn't so much, but the whole idea is that you're accountable to your creator.
Yeah,
And I think that's interesting, and that's kind of interesting the way that Brian and I often talk about it is that sometimes we place countries as being these certain religions, even though obviously that's the dominant religion in this place. But we ascribe the motives to these certain religious groups when it's really just nationalities. It's kind of like saying Great Britain is a Christian country. Well, for the majority case, it is, but obviously, that you live there, then not everyone's a Christian. It's the same thing as saying, like, pointing to
like
what
America as well.
America's military is doing and say, look what Christians are doing. And now
Sure.
Christians here would say, not all of us, they're not Christians. Just because they don't celebrate Hanukkah or go to Mecca does not mean they are Christians because they celebrate Christmas. Like that's a whole different thing. But I do think that that's what I've kind of seen since basically since like 9/11. What we've been kind of taught to believe about Muslims is that they're terrorists, right? Like that
Sure.
they hate us just for being American and Christian. Now, I know that's not always the case, but if of course you think about like what's happened in the Middle East and all the wars that have been fought on behalf of Israel, there's a reason why they hate us. And then obviously the most extreme factions will get their voices amplified. But I do think that has a lot to do with it, of basically, again, like radicalizing me, like seeing the
Mm.
result, almost like, like panning back and like look at what's the results of all these wars. And then so now people in Europe and obviously parts of America are dealing with these refugee crises. But I mean, like, but why are there so many refugees? It's because
Yeah.
we're bombing their countries and then we're displacing them. And then certain people, certain NGOs have the idea of let's keep all the borders open. And so now Western civilization is losing its identity. So it's kind of like, I don't have a problem with Muslims. I don't want to live next to them. I don't want anybody who's going to move to my country and not try to assimilate. And I think that, of course, now we look at like kind of the economics of everything. Like we can't afford to take in a bunch of people who are not productive, but yet we
Yeah.
continue to do that. And obviously, you guys do that in Europe, and I think that it really is a tragedy. I think that the Hasbro or the propaganda has really got us white men to be self-loathing, or at least maybe not so much like guys like you and I, but almost being afraid to say, it's actually okay to be a white Christian man and have a culture that we want to share with the generations that come after us. Because now we're kind of looking back at our childhood and you're like, man, it was a lot better then, wasn't it? Like, like the things that what our countries look like. But
Yeah.
saying that is viewed now as being racist. And it's like, it's not racist to say that you prefer to live around people who have similar views to you and have a similar culture to you. I mean, obviously skin color is part of that, but it's not the majority part of it. So like that as a Christian, I don't care what shade of color you are. If you're in Christ, you're my brother. But I think that's part of it. So like then you have a person who's a Muslim, who's obviously not the same color as me, has all kinds of different cultures than me. And it's like we can't really assimilate together because we're not the same. And they don't want to be like me, which is
Yeah.
fine. I mean, that's
Yeah.
their idea, but I think that's what we've seen here. It's like this, so now we have little colonies of people in these greater countries, and now the people who are natives to this country, in your country, we don't feel safe anymore. And we're like, this place, it's like we've been invaded by these people, and it's like, and why? And I mean, I think if you look at the results of World War II, I mean, it's hard to look back now and say the good guys had won, because look at the results. Not saying the other guys were good, but I'm saying like that maybe there was no good sides. Because if you look at it, like the results are it just erosion of sovereign countries and just the complete watering down of our culture. And it's like it is a kind of a black pill. It's kind of depressing to think like that if you've got children, they're not going to grow up in a place that is anything like the one that we did.
Well, hey, you're a man of faith. I'm definitely on my journey. I have faith for the future. And
Well, that's good.
You said a lot there, and I would mostly agree. I personally haven't got any hate for Muslims, but I am like, the reality is, I don't think the two can assimilate. I don't think it's good for them. I don't think it's good for British or Americans to be in the same area, because there is just going to be this conflict for power eventually. Both want to spread across the world, and both have different values, different ideals. But you're completely right. At the end of the day, it would only be fair that they do have a place to live. It would only be fair that they're not completely carpet bombed up and down their countries. And then when you see who's lobbying for all these wars, and then who's then at the same time lobbying for open borders, it paints a picture. It paints a picture, one that we'll hopefully get into.
Yeah, well, I mean, of course, it is interesting that we've had, like, Netanyahu's been giving speeches before our Congress for like the last 30 years with all these threats. And it's always been like, the argument is, if you don't fight him over there, you're going to fight him here.
Mm.
But the truth is, now we are going to fight them here because they're here now. Like, isn't it like, in the irony? The irony is like that, because you fought them over there, now we imported them to here because there's no place for them to live over there anymore.
Yeah, for sure. We see all these kind of issues in society, and I know one of the things that you do really well is you zoom out and you kind of you look at the bigger picture of things. I want to get onto that, but just before we do, I want to ask you about just reading the Bible, because I speak to Brian and he says, allow the Holy Spirit to guide you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I'm reading this verse, and where is it? And for me, it's like, it's a book of riddles. So I actually appreciate talking to people like yourself way more, because Brian tells me, avoid ChatGPT, avoid the internet, because that's just gonna, send you down the wrong path. Or do it all through the Holy Spirit. And so this verse, Matthew 5:29, and it's saying, if your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. For it's better for you to lose one of the members than your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off. Throw it away, for it's better for you to lose one of your members than your whole body go into hell. So, like, I've done the good thing. I've avoided ChatGPT, and I'm thinking on it, and I'm trying to decipher what it means. In my head, I was thinking, okay, if you're in a friendship group, if you've got a bad apple in the group, cut off the friendship, do what's right for you as a person, right? And I asked, then I went to church and be like, this is what I think it means. Is that right? And then he says to me, oh, no. Back in the day in the Romans, what they would do, they said this thing, cut off your hand. When they got baptized, they would baptize their body, and they would leave their hand out the water, because it's their hand which would be doing the killing, right?
And I've never heard that.
Yeah, and I just thought, like, how am I going to get that? How am I going to decipher that if I can't Google or ChatGPT this thing?
I would say that I was a person who grew up going to church every Sunday. My parents forced me to go. Not like it was always a force, but a situation where, like, we were going to church, and then I went to Christian schools. Even when I went to Liberty University, so I graduated from a Christian Baptist school. But I would have been probably right with you. I would not have been able to give you a good answer, like what that actually, like, in all, how do you apply that verse, what Jesus is saying, to your life? But it was a situation where, again, like in 2021, when I had probably read through the Bible before, like, but never like cover to cover. I never really kind of did it like in one kind of steady reading, more like just hopping around. But I was like, finally, at that point in my life, I was like really seeking God. And I was like, I don't trust anything else, but I do believe that God is true. I believe Jesus is the truth. So I started reading the Bible. And then what I ended up trying to do later was there was, a lot of people read devotionals, and I asked my brother about that, and he said, don't read those. Just read the Bible. Kind of like probably what Brian's saying. Just read it. And I'm like, where do I start? Just start anywhere. Just start reading it. So I started to do that. And at very first, I was going through like a rough time in my life. So I was trying to seek out any verse that talks about like, cast your cares upon me because he cares for you. Like, anything to remove this anxiousness that I had. So then I would read in the Psalms, and I was looking for comfort and verses that gave me hope. And so it was kind of like I was reading it for me. Like I needed comfort. But then praise God, he delivered me of that anxiety. And I did start to be able to maybe read the Bible in a different way, because when you think about it, like when you're trying to read it just for your own kind of like daily life, or like trying to have applicable things to, to be a better person and to get closer to God. I mean, that's good. And I'm not saying you shouldn't do that. But what the Bible really is, it's a story of God's Son and the redemption of humanity. Right. So like it's really not about you or I. It's really not about anybody except for Christ. And then you see, but we do fit into this story. So then what I tried to do later was I want to read the Bible to kind of understand who God is and like what his ultimate plan is and his character. So if you start reading the Bible like that, you'll start to read parts that you don't really want to read. Parts that doesn't seem like it really makes sense to you. Like it doesn't make sense in 2026 to be reading about the old Levitical law and all the things. But all that being said, so when I started to read it like that, and I also tried to remove the biases I had about what people told me the Bible said before I actually read it. Because that's the thing. It's like, especially people like me, I'm not sure about your background, but people like me, obviously you're going to church. You have a man wearing a couple $1,000 suit. Sounds like he's very sharp. Sounds like he's read it many times and he knows what he's talking about. So he's telling you what the Bible's saying. And this is happening over and over again. And this is before you're basically old enough to really read it for yourself. So trying to remove what you've been told it says is something that actually is important, because when you actually read it in the context, and then you do try to put yourself in the shoes of the original audience, it will definitely speak to you in a different way. So all that being said, back to the verse about it's better to pluck out your eye than your whole body getting cast in hell. Better to cut off your hand than your whole body being cast into hell. What Jesus is really trying to do is he's trying to get these people to focus on the things that they cannot see versus the things that they can see. So like the Old Testament is a shadow of the new covenant, the old covenant. It's all about the flesh, physical temples, physical sacrifices, promises about land and about prosperity on the earth. And so when Jesus is coming, he's saying, it's not like that. You're going to have to deny that in order to get the eternal reward. Do not store up your treasure where the moth and rust can get it. Store your treasure up in heaven. And so like he's trying to show you that this is not all that matters. Even that's why he says that you guys think you're good because you don't commit adultery. But I tell you, if you look at that woman, that married woman with lustful intent, then you've already committed adultery. So he's, saying like, so he's saying like that what you physically do is not important as the spirit, what you want to do. And so I think that idea is like, I don't think he's literally telling people to cut off their hand, but he's trying to give an example of how extreme it is. That hand is going to die anyways one day, but your spirit is not. So do not forsake your spirit for your hand or your eye, because what I'm talking about is all this dies eventually. So you don't want to go to hell. You want to go to be with me forever.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That makes a lot of sense. And actually that fits into this perfectly, because, we're talking about feminism earlier. There's all of these examples of, how Judaism is affecting modern life, or Zionism, or, whatever it is. There's links with this with feminism. There's links with the Federal Reserve. Everyone's in crazy debt. There's, all the stuff which is coming out with Epstein right now.
Mm-hmm.
what do you think is going on there in terms of, is it the religion? Is it, the Zionism? They say it's kind of divorced from God. Is that what the new religion is? Like, what exactly? How do you kind of see all that stuff and how it links?
No, I mean, I think that that's one of the probably more important topics is that, again, through biblical understanding, you can see the false choice between what they're trying to give Christians today about that you have to support Israel. So that's what Zionism basically is that these people, by some kind of blood relation to Jacob, one of the original patriarchs, are promised this land. And so then Christians have to support that because we're not good Christians if we don't. But really, you think about it. So there was an old covenant, and the first partaker in this covenant was Abraham. And so when God promised him that his descendants would have this land of Canaan, and then not only that, but that his descendants he'd have a descendant that would bless all nations. So if you really think about it, all the way back to the very beginning of it, it was, again, you had a promise to bless all nations, not one particular chosen people. Now, what the promise to Abraham was really about was that through his seed, through his line, was going to become the Messiah. And so when the Messiah came, everything was going to change because you really think about it. So all these promises are fulfilled through Christ Jesus. So then when the new covenant comes, it says in Hebrews that it makes the old covenant obsolete. And it was saying even now the old covenant is vanishing away. And I think that when you think about the context of when this is being written, the temple is still standing in Jerusalem. But then 70 AD comes and the temple is destroyed. So the old covenant cannot really be kept in the way that it was once kept. And it's interesting, too, is that the genealogies for the people who are related to the sons of Israel was kept in the temple. So when Jesus prophesied in Matthew 24 that not one stone was going to be left upon another, that Jerusalem was going to be surrounded and burned to the ground, when that took place, it took out the ability to keep the old covenant, and it actually took out their genealogy so they could never even prove again who they were related to. And even before that, though, John the Baptist and both Jesus himself tell these people, do not claim to be children of Abraham. Don't think because you're related to Abraham, it's going to save you at any point. Because regardless if God made promises to these patriarchs, you still had to believe like they did in order to get the promises that those original patriarchs were given. So Jesus at one point tells the Pharisees that you claim, you are a descendants of Abraham. But then later he clarifies that you're not children of Abraham, you're children of the devil. Because children of Abraham would be happy to see me, but instead you're trying to kill me. So you're the exact opposite of Abraham. Even though he's saying you're descendants of Abraham, you're not children of Abraham. Paul says the same thing, that the children of Abraham are of the promise, because Abraham had more than one kid, but it was only about Isaac because that's the one that God promised him. So his other attempts to have a family and nations were all in the flesh. So that was never, those promises were not given to those other sons. So it was always about that God promised him something. Eventually that's fulfilled through Isaac. And then that same promise is carried on through the children of Israel. So all that being said, so understanding that there's only one way to go to heaven, according to the Bible, if you believe Jesus, right? So if you're a Christian, obviously we would acknowledge that he's the way, the truth, and the life, because that's what he said. No man comes to the Father but through me. So now if you think about Christian Zionism, this is really jacked up because they rejected Jesus because he was not the Messiah they wanted. Not because they didn't believe that God sent him, because he was not what they wanted. Because what they wanted was a conquering king like David, and they wanted their Messiah to overthrow Roman rule and give them back their land and their temple and all the things that they wanted. And so when Jesus said, my kingdom's not of this world, the kingdom's not coming in ways that can be observed, they crucified him for it. So they killed him. And what did they say? They said, Pilate said, he wanted to give them a prisoner back. They could take Barabbas, who was a murderer and led a rebellion, or they could take back Jesus. They said, give us Barabbas. And then so Pilate says, I'm washing my hands of this innocent man's blood. I don't want anything to do with this. This is on y'all. And they said, put the blood on us. Put it on our children. I mean, like that's literally what they cried back out to him. So if you think about it, so now you think about this whole concept of these land promises. So throughout the Bible, God had dispersed the Israelites and then brought them back. But when they were brought back, they repented, right? And then they were in good stead with him. And of course, then they rebel again, and it happened again. So it happened once with Assyria and Babylon, and then later it happens again, for the last time with the Romans. So now what we're supposed to believe is this is another act of God, 1948 or 1918 with the Balfour Declaration, or was it 1917, where the Rothschilds and the British government and eventually America collude together to bring the Jews back into the land of Judah or Israel.
Right.
Well, if you think about it, like the idea of like Christians trying to prop this idea up as like, this is what God wants. It's like, it's literally the thing that's getting them to still not, it's the thing that's preventing them from getting what the real covenant's about. It's about a heavenly reward. It's not about land. I mean, it's interesting. If you ever heard the story of Jacob and Esau. So Jacob, again, they're both sons of Isaac. So they're both related to Abraham. Esau was the firstborn. Jacob was born afterwards. They're twin brothers, but they're born like within a couple minutes, I guess. Well, there's the famous story is that Jacob gets Esau to trade his birthright to him for a bowl of soup. So like all the things that God had promised, like Abraham and then Isaac, like Jacob wants it. And of course he tricks his brother, but it's interesting. But like the point is that Jacob was like, what do I have use of a birthright? Just give me the soup. That's what is going on today. It's like, because if you really believe what God has promised you, you look at that land, it's like not even all that great anymore. Of course, like according to the Bible, it was a land flowing with milk and honey. It doesn't look all that spectacular. It looks kind of, there's much more beautiful places in the world. So why do they want that so much more than what God has to offer? Because they don't believe it, right? So they don't believe it. And that's the same reason that Esau took the bowl of soup. Because what use do I have of that? I don't really believe in that. So just give me the soup. So they'll take the land, and then Christians promoting this idea that that's what God really wants for them. It's like they're never going to get it. And then you're like encouraging this. And of course, then you're encouraging like the conflict and the violence that goes along with that. We're like, well, I like those better than the Muslims. So it's like, but if we're Christians and we believe that there's one way to go to heaven, aren't they all going to the same place if they die in some war? So we as Christians shouldn't want that.
Right. Yeah, no, exactly. And it goes back to what you were saying earlier, cutting off the hand. There's still this obsession with material goods. Mm-hmm. And if you are following Christianity, this is like the realm in which the devil controls people, right?
Right. Well, it's the famous story is that when Jesus was about to start his ministry, the devil took him up to a high place and showed him all the kingdoms of the world. Right. I'll give them to you. And that's interesting. So that's what people often miss in the stories. That's what Jesus was coming to get. Not in the way that the devil was going to give them to him, but it's like he was going to, that's what his inheritance was the nations. So the devil promises him, you can have all these things without the sacrifice. All you have to do is worship me. And I think that Jesus didn't tell him, you don't have the ability to give them to me. Obviously, the implication is that he did. But of course, if he would have took that deal, well, things would have been pretty bad for us. But I think that that's what we're seeing now is like that there's lots of people who have taken that deal. And those are the people we're dealing with.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's the whole, like they still believe in sacrifice, right? Jesus was the sacrifice for all humanity. So for us, that's kind of off the table now, which like, I don't know, it's just a backwards way of thinking. If you still believe in animal sacrifice, if you still believe in like the whole red heifer thing, if there's still this divide, calling themselves the chosen people and referring to everyone else as goyim, clearly, like, how can you support that? Any form of superiority isn't going to go well, you know. And I mean, the US, you guys are seeing it clear as day, just like who seems to be actually in charge, you know.
Oh yeah, 100%. Of course, there's the meme of like, the president you voted for, the president you got, and of course we're seeing a picture of like Trump next to Netanyahu.
BB, yeah.
No, but I mean, I think it's one thing that I don't know, like how many people who are obviously, there are people from Israel that would listen to this podcast, but I've often would want to ask somebody this is, okay, so obviously there was a lot of skeptics of Jesus back in Israel, back in the first century when he came. And they said, oh, well, he's from Nazareth. He's not from Bethlehem. Maybe, of course, the Bible clarifies it. He lived in a certain place, but he was born in a certain place. They were trying to say, like, for all the reasons that he wasn't, his mother born him in fornication. She was actually not a virgin. All the things. They said he was not actually related to David and wrong stock, all this stuff. And then, of course, then he wasn't what they wanted him to be. Okay, so really think about it. Like, so they claim to believe the same God of the Old Testament that we believe in. Okay, so why did, if they rejected a false Messiah, then why did God allow the Romans within one generation to come in there and destroy the whole place? And has never let them build another temple since then. Isn't that a pretty good argument that he actually was who he said he was? Because he prophesied that temple was going to be destroyed, and it was, and has not been rebuilt. And what we're told is 2,000 years. Now, that should actually make you think of something. Like, if they were right, why would God have allowed that? Because they were not right.
Well, this is it. And it seems that they've only just doubled down more and more. And I know this is kind of your specialty, but I'm so curious. I really want to pick your brains on this whole idea of Satan's little season, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I guess can you give like a brief summary of like what that actually means?
Yeah, well, so if you go into the book of Revelation, so of course that's where people get the end times. Most of their end times eschatology comes from the book of Revelation, and it comes from Matthew 24, Luke 21, and Mark 13. Obviously, there's some things from, Daniel and all that kind of stuff. But if you get towards the end of the book of Revelation, there's Revelation chapter 20. Revelation 19 ends with this great battle, which people believe is the Battle of Armageddon. At the end of this battle, the beast and the false prophet are thrown into the lake of fire. And then so chapter 20 starts, where this is when the start of like the 1,000 years of Christ starts, what people refer to as like the millennial reign. So the very beginning is an angel takes the devil, binds him up in chains, and takes him and puts him in a pit. And so there's this curious verse about that, is that so during this time, the devil's put in a pit so he cannot deceive the nations any longer. Then the dead in Christ are raised, and they reign with Christ for 1,000 years. And then later it says, after that, it says, the key verse is, I think it's verse 7, where it says, but then after this 1,000 years has expired, the devil must be loose for a little season. And then he goes out the four corners of the earth, deceives the nations, and brings about this massive army that's the number of the sands of the sea, to eventually come against the camp of the saints and then the beloved city. And then the fire comes down on them. They're destroyed. Eventually the devil's thrown into the lake of fire, and then everybody's judged at the great white throne. But that's that little verse there that most Christians probably don't even know is in the Bible, is that after the 1,000 years is over, the devil comes back and he deceives the nations. And that's a verse that really kind of tripped me out for pretty much as long as I was reading the Bible. I was like, wait a minute, God, so why are you going to throw the beast and the false prophet into the lake of fire, but you're going to stick the devil in a pit and then let him out again? And like, why don't you just throw him in the lake of fire too? Because it's the end. Well, obviously it's not the end, right? It's like, it's not the end of time. There's 1,000 more years, and then there's time after that. And then the next question would be, how in the world is the devil going to deceive people after the events of Revelation take place, after this 1,000 years? And the more I started to wrestle around with that idea, I guess I just always kept on putting it to the side, because like, I'm a curious person by nature, so I want an answer, but at the same time, it's really not applicable to us because we're clearly living before the times of the Book of Revelation. But then I started to do more research, and I said, well, what if we're not? Like, what if we are living after the times of when Christ returned? We're living after the 1,000 years. Would we know it? And I think that's a question that people need to really ask themselves is like, so how would the devil deceive people? And I think the best answer, honestly, is that the people living in that time where Satan is loose for a little season do not know the times they're living in. And maybe that's how the devil does it, is he makes you think you're living before that time. You know, because I really just think about it like that. It's like that if history was distorted, would we know? I mean, if you think about it, like, you go back to like we're talking about 2020 and 2021, all the experts were saying this one thing. It just happened to be incorrect. So if you think about like that, if you don't believe the news today, and I hope that you don't, I hope you're at least a little skeptical of what the news says. Okay, so we're all aware of the term fake news. So what's fake news? It's 5 years old. It's fake history, right? So like the stuff that the way we view 2020 is probably different than the way it's going to be written about like in 50 years. So what about 50 years? What about the stuff that took place 75 years ago? What about like World War II stuff? Do we trust the history about World War II? What about if you go back 100 years? You go back to like World War I and how they say that started. Okay, so now we're getting in, like the further you go back, the more people are going to say it really didn't happen like that. Like things are being twisted to fit this narrative. It's kind of like the history tells us that the good guys won every major war. Oh, really? That's convenient, right? Right? What are the odds? What are the odds the good guys always win? But then they also tell us that the history is written by the winners. And there's this famous quote by Napoleon is that history is a set of lies agreed upon. So now really think about it. So now if you believe that we're in the year 2026 AD, year of our Lord, if you went back 2,000 years, all the stuff that's taken place in the last 2,000 years, could you reliably trust that kind of stuff? And if the answer is not 100% yes, well, then maybe you should consider that they've lied about lots of it. And we don't really know where we're at on this biblical timeline. So the main gist of like the idea of the little season, at least from me, like from a biblical basis, is if you start to read the Gospels, you start to read the epistles from his apostles, they're all pointing to Christ returning almost immediately. He ascends to heaven and he's coming back soon. And all of the language is about soon. And it's all about there's this cataclysm. There's this time of Jacob's trouble coming. And I think that's why when you get into like Matthew 24, Luke 21, and Mark 13, when Jesus is telling the apostles that the temple is going to be destroyed, then they ask him, when will these things be? And what will the signs be? He lists all the signs. And then he tells them he's coming on the clouds. At the same time, he's talking about the temple being destroyed. Well, historically, that happened. So he's kind of wrapping all these events into one certain thing. And then he follows it all up by saying that, truly, I tell you, before this generation passes away, all these things will take place. Now, some people will say, oh, he's talking about the generation that sees these things. Okay, sure. But he was talking about the generation who would see the temple being destroyed. So that's why today, like we're being told that, oh, they need to build another temple in Jerusalem in order for these prophecies to be fulfilled. But they're never talking about a third temple. They're talking about the one that's like literally visible. I mean, they're literally looking at it. Jesus is like pointing at this temple. You see these stones? There'll be not one stone left upon another that will not be thrown down. So he says, in a generation, we'll see this. 40 years later, after he said that, the temple was destroyed and fulfilled to the word, where historians like Josephus wrote that gold melted down into the foundations of the temple, and the Romans went and pried them all up to get all the gold out. So like Jerusalem was devastated. These people were either killed or just completely dispersed. And then again, you have at this point, we know that history says that Christianity spread like wildfire within like 300 years. And then it was like the world religion of the Romans. But I think that part of that story is just like really pinpointing the fact that that Jesus tells his disciples that truly I tell you, some standing here will not taste death until you see the Son of Man coming into his kingdom. He told them, so that's Matthew 16:28. Matthew 10:23, Jesus tells them they would not have gone through all the towns of Israel before the Son of Man comes. So he's talking about like these prophecies from Daniel, this Son of Man coming on the clouds. He's saying that all this is taking place. And the 70-week prophecy of Daniel concludes with the destruction and the desolation of the temple and the coming of the Messiah. So this timeline is only today modernly interpreted as there's this big gap between the 69th week and the 70th week. But if you read it continuously, it leads to when Christ comes and then eventually Jerusalem's destroyed. So with that whole idea, so what if you just take Jesus at his word and he came back in the first century and not coming back in the 21st century? Could we be past that? And then you get into some more wild, maybe physical evidence of destruction around the world, and even evidence of a better time than this. And as you get into like the Greco-Roman architecture, the Gothic cathedrals, the medieval castles, and all that stuff, there's lots of evidence that there was a very advanced civilization somewhere in our past, but it's really hard to pinpoint where.
Right. Actually, yeah, like you're saying with all the how time is often distorted, how even recent history, it's like a guessing game whether or not you're getting the real story, right? And one of my favorite quotes right now is, "What's the difference between a conspiracy theory and the truth?" A couple years.
Maybe these days, like 6 months. Well, it's funny. I was just sharing that meme around with that little girl, and she's got like kind of this smirk on her face, like it looks like she's like in the kindergarten, of saying conspiracy theorists watching the government or the public find out about satanic pedophiles being real. And while the whole Epstein stuff coming out, yeah, that's kind of what we're talking about. It's like that these kind of potential truths are uncomfortable. Like, it's uncomfortable to talk about the idea that what if Jesus already came back? Because you'll get people really mad when you start to say that. And of course, I had the opposite view before, is that I was thinking, like, based on 2020 and 2021, I was like, the end is definitely near. Like, something's coming. Like, this seems like the tribulation is about to happen. So that's how I started. So when a lot of people try to say, oh, you're wrong because of this, it's like, I had the same view as everyone else until this. I don't think anybody really starts out believing this who's going to church, because you'll never hear this from the pulpit. But truth be told, there's a lot of different perspectives about eschatology. But when you go to like an American Protestant church, you'll be told that there's one view. There's one correct view and everybody else is wrong. But you don't know that in Orthodoxy and also in, Catholicism, they believe in something called amillennialism, where they spiritualize 1,000 years. And so they're saying they're living in it right now. Versus like the Protestants saying it's a literal physical reign where Jesus and his saints are like living like right here with us. And it's a perfect time. But if you think about it, like, so if that view is correct, you still have to kind of struggle with that idea. So if Jesus is right there, you have all these people like in glorified bodies and angels, like right there. How is the devil going to trick people after that? You know what I mean? You're thinking like this, what you're picturing is like the most perfect time ever. And then the devil just comes out and says, hey, everybody, you want to rebel against this? And everyone just says, cool, let's do it.
Right.
What time? Yeah. Let's do that now. So, but then of course I said, if you think about what Jesus also tells Pilate again, he says that my kingdom's not of this world. The Pharisees question him in Luke 17 saying, when is how is the kingdom coming? And Jesus says, truly, I tell you, the kingdom is not coming in ways that can be observed. So with him saying that, maybe it's not like what you think it is. I mean, I think it's like there is that kind of irony that maybe is lost on a lot of people, is if I say he already came back and here's evidence that he did. And I can lay out evidence. I can't give you proof, but I can give you evidence. How much different is it than when like somebody like Paul and the apostles are coming saying, the Messiah came, he died, and then he rose again, and now he's gone. And they're like, really? Are you sure? Like, if they had never seen him, they never saw him resurrected, it'd be like, yeah, trust us, guys. He actually died, and then he rose again, and he was here for 40 days, but now he's gone and he's in heaven. You could have the same kind of reactions of people saying like that he came back and here's the evidence of it. It's like, is it really that much different what I'm saying? Either way, it's like I think that people need to have, I guess, more grace for different views, because what I'm saying is I believe the Bible's true. Now, if you say the Bible's true and you believe in Jesus, well, then I don't have a beef with you. We can have a different interpretation. We can agree to disagree. But the truth is, we all believe that the story's true. Now, the real question is, where are we at on this timeline, this biblical timeline? And I think that if you're open to the idea, I think that there's a lot more out there. And when you really think about, has there ever been a more deceptive time to be alive, where people are questioning like literally everything, like including like the shape of the earth? Like people don't know what to trust. We don't trust the doctors. We don't trust historians. We don't trust scientists like Dr. Fauci. We don't trust our politicians. So maybe that's what the devil deceiving the nations would be like.
Yeah. I mean, one of the stuff, I guess, in our lifetime, this is for sure the most amount of like loss of trust with the establishment, with all these institutions. But, some people say that we're witnessing the end of this empire, so would this be the exact same feelings that people would have felt when Rome was, destroying itself and everything else? But yeah, in our lifetime, I think this is the craziest time for at least 100 years, or at least since World War II. But
well, I mean, obviously you would just think that the major difference would be that they probably didn't have government schools back in the days of Rome, right? Like we have a certain type of school system it's a more modern phenomenon. It's like, here's the list of books that the government says are true. Teach the kids this. Now, what was history taught to the people living like in the 1st century or the 3rd century? I mean, I imagine it had a lot to do with the parents and what they believed. They taught their kids what they believed. And it wasn't, it makes sense. Again, like that if Napoleon ever actually said this, that history is a set of lies agreed upon. It's like the whole point is like that they want you to believe a certain story because they want you to have a certain kind of present and future, like that they are trying to control. So who controls the history is a control mechanism. So back in the day, it would have been a lot harder to get the same kind of message, and it would probably be really hard to indoctrinate so many people. But also at the same time, we have the ability now through the internet to be able to wake up a lot more people at the same time, that we can have conversations like, again, across, 1,000 miles of water and time zones. We can still have a conversation about this stuff, which is obviously is only a very recent thing that we'd be able to facilitate this. So, yeah, I mean, I also do believe that it says in Ecclesiastes 1, it talks about there being nothing new under the sun. What has been done and will be done again. Like this is no great mystery. Like we live in a place that has a cyclical periods of time. And it makes sense to me. And as I brought it up at the very beginning of the podcast, we have a God who's never changing. We have a devil who's the same, and people are mostly the same. So like noticing like the rises in golden ages and then falls of empire, it does seem like this is just what happens. Like it's kind of almost a natural propensity of humans to strive for something, people willing to die for this idea. Then the next generation gets it and they get to reap all the benefits of it. But then by the 3rd generation, they know nothing but the good time. And then what they always say, like bad times make good people, or hard times makes good people. And obviously weak times makes weak people. So it kind of makes sense like that you would have a cyclical thing that would happen. And so like now we do feel like regardless of where you are on eschatology or even politically, you have to look at today, the state of things, and you're saying like, we're on the backside of something. We're not going up anymore.
Yeah, exactly. And, like you're saying, back in the day, they didn't have all this infrastructure. They didn't have the internet. It is a double-edged sword. okay, people can wake up quicker, but people can also get brainwashed quicker too, right?
Oh,
And
absolutely.
like, I think the big one, which is really keeping so many people down, is money. And all right, back in the day, they never had this fiat system, which is global. Back in the day, if usury was out of hand, then 109 countries would just be like, all right, you got two choices. Either we're going to kill you or you can leave. The choice is yours. Now we can't do that. Now we can't just give the choice of death or leave because it's global, right?
Yeah, well, sure. I mean, that's obviously by design. And yeah, I mean, I do think that the movie like The Matrix, it's probably overused in like this community, but it's only because it's such a good example of like what an actual matrix is. And I do think it is about this just fake financial system that we're all caught up in, that we're all just cogs in this little machine. And we're like literally like what it's described as like we're this battery to just power this satanic system. So we work jobs that we hate to buy stuff we don't need in order to what? Maybe one day retire, eat a fake steak. You think
Not
about
have
that whole idea,
families.
especially today, like with the cipher, like wanting to get inserted back into the matrix to eat a fake steak. It's like, bro, we're eating fake steak right now. Like, unless you're getting like unless you know what cow you got it from. I mean, like, you think you guys are doing a lot better probably over in Europe, but in America, like we don't trust what they're feeding us anymore. Like it literally could be fake. So like that system, I think that's what made me kind of understand like what the matrix is. It's like that we are working and they are slowly devaluing all our currencies at the same time. So like we are in this hamster wheel and we're never going to, you're never going to get there. Like they want to keep pushing back the age of retirement. And I think that really does prevent people from like seeing like what's actually there, because we're like, I don't have time to worry about what they're lying to me about, because I just need to make this money and then I'll be able to take this vacation. I'll be able to retire. I'll be able to do this. So we don't really have time for all the things that we should be focusing our efforts for. And I think it's like that we are distracted by things while people are robbing us blind. And I think that's the matrix. And yeah, when you do see like the root of like usury, and how it is interesting that if you do historically, I know my buddy Vitali, he does a lot of research on this now. Yeah, historically, just all these countries were saying it was illegal, which, truth be told, it's still illegal in a lot of places. Like, of course, now the definition has changed, where it's like super high interest is only wrong. But like, whose definition of what's high interest? Even now today, like they're giving college age children today in America credit cards with 30% interest on them. These people don't even have jobs. Like that should be totally illegal. Is that not usury? And then so you create debt slaves, and these debt slaves can never get out of that debt. And again, it's obviously just a biblical truth. When you had Christian countries, they knew this was wrong. And even in Islam, they know it's wrong. There's only one really religion who says it's okay.
Well, this is it. Okay, so with the little season, then I don't know if you have the pictures on you or anything, but what evidence do you kind of have that this 1,000-year civilization, Jesus' second coming, what evidence is there? Because I know you say you can't prove it, but you've got little snippets, haven't you?
Yeah, I guess it just depends where you want to go. I mean, some of the things that kind of really woke people up to, I can maybe try to pull up some pictures. I know I saved a bunch on my Pinterest page. Pinterest can be for guys too.
Here.
I saved a bunch of stuff on here, but I think a lot of people, their first really like clue into like something about our history is off. Is something they called either Tartaria, or they talk about the mud flood, or they talk about the old world. So there's been this fascination since I kind of got onto TikTok and everything. There was just something about the buildings that from 100 years ago or more, it started to really blow people away. Like why are we going backwards when so many things look so amazing, back in the day. And so there's just this architecture that's all around the whole world that resembles like Greco-Roman architect. It's like you have like the different types where it's like you have Greco-Roman style, right? Basilica style. Then you have Gothic cathedrals, and then you have castles. And we just look at them and we're kind of in awe of them. But when you don't have really eyes to really, or if you don't just start to question, like, so when did they build that? And how long did it take? I mean, that's kind of what more people have done recently. But I mean, like at some point, you've walked around these places your whole life. You've walked past these buildings and there's something about them, but well, they're right there. So like, of course, somebody built them. Why does it matter? And I think now we're kind of only getting to the place where it matters because it might be a total lie.
Right.
So here, I think I want to say this is in Great Britain somewhere. This big old arched building here. Have you ever seen this one?
I've never seen this. No.
Yeah, I mean, of course, like I said, there's kind of countless examples of buildings that, when you really think about it for like 5 seconds, they don't really make a lot of sense. Like why they were building buildings that look like this 100 years ago.
Yeah, like how would they have the tools? Why would they take, like, now it's just so basic, all of the buildings. It's just a copy and paste skyscraper or whatever.
Yeah, they're made of glass and steel, and they have no personality, they have no character. And then you look at something like that, and you're like, we're told historically that these people were worried about scarcity back in those days, of like not freezing to death in the wintertime, not starving to death. Right?
Right.
But yeah, they were knocking this kind of stuff out at the same time. And you're like, something about this story does not really fit. You know what I'm saying? Like that, how can it be both? Because now we live in a time where things are supposedly easier to build, right? We don't have a problem of scarcity. And yet we can't wrap our minds around them ever taking the time and somebody having the skill to make something like that today. And yet every old city, even in America, which of course has it's a much more recent place than Great Britain, there's examples of like these kind of buildings everywhere in every old city. Yeah, then you get, like I said, you get into like some of the Greco-Roman architecture, and it just, I don't know, there's something about it. It's kind of weird to me that everybody around the whole world had this fascination with Greco-Roman architecture, so much so that we just kept on building even our state capitol buildings with domes and cathedrals, domes and spires and Roman columns. Like, this is in Minnesota. It just, yeah, there's just so many, there's countless examples of like, why is this building a Capitol building in almost every place in the world? Doesn't it look like the Vatican? But we're told they built this in St. Paul, Minnesota. Why? You know what I mean? Like, look at the insides of these places are incredible.
Yeah.
These are supposed to be just for public servants. I believe this one is in. Okay, is that in Minnesota? This one might be in Texas. Oh no, that's still in Minnesota. I mean, it's absolutely incredible. I mean, I could bore you eventually just showing you all the countless examples of buildings just like that. Well, I mean, there's people obviously on Instagram and TikTok and X and everything. They do nothing but post old pictures of these kinds of buildings, and there's never an end to it. Never. But you're thinking about, like, so when you actually look at the timeline, like, lots of these buildings, they're built in like the late 1890s or early 1900s, and they're all built at the same time. So then, but at one point they just stopped building that kind of thing. So if you start to look at some of the timelines, and I'm not saying anything particular about the pictures I was showing you now, because I'm not, I'm just going to speak generally. A lot of these places have like really short timelines. When this is before they had power tools, this is before they had like the really kind of modern excavation equipment. And
Right.
supposedly these
Transport,
people
the
have,
roads.
the infrastructure to transport
Mm.
materials. So they would have had horses and buggies, hammers and chisels. And these buildings are made of stone. So you got to think about like logistics of it. It's almost like it goes back to almost even like the idea when people start to question the timelines of the pyramids or how they did the pyramids. It's like, well, not only are they all hand carved, but the quarry is like hundreds of miles from the Giza plateaus. Like, how did they get them there? There's all kinds of things that would be like, that makes no sense to us. And at a time, again, that it would have been harder to do. And all these buildings have basements and they have tunnels that are connected to these other old buildings. It's just the most bizarre thing. But then if you actually, my favorite place to actually go to talk about some of this stuff is when you look at some like biblical evidence of it, because as a Christian, that's the first place I go, because I think that's the most important part to me. But if you look at, I had more pictures about this, but there's something called the mud flood. And this is often just gets kind of lumped into this idea of Tartaria or the old world. But I think that this is really significant because if you guys are not aware, like ancient Rome was buried under the ground. And I mean that literally. Like they find Roman architecture all under the ground all the time. And so when you go back to the book of Revelation, this is where I'm going to focus at, is that John is told by Christ to write these letters to these 7 churches that are in Asia. But now I like to say they were in Asia because they're no longer in Asia. And so these are the letters that Christ is saying, I want you to tell the people the things that you see, the things that are, and the things that must take place after this. So part of the book of Revelation is clearly the timeline. It's now, like the things that are happening now, and also the things that are happening after this. So when Christ says he's coming soon, it says, the book of Revelation says in Revelation 22 that do not seal up this prophecy because the time is at hand. He's saying like all this stuff is taking place now. So dispensationalists like to say that these 7 churches that are in modern day Turkey now, those are just, they're like allegories of like church ages. They're not actually literal churches. But I mean, let scripture interpret scripture. These are real people. These are real places. And now the interesting part about it is like pretty much everything about ancient Rome, people discover Roman artifacts and buildings under the ground on accident all the time. And nobody at any point in my whole life really stopped to answer the question, how did Rome get buried like that? And when I say buried, I know what people are thinking. You're thinking of like I'm talking about Roman coins or something, like a pot or something like that. No, I'm talking about like cities like this. See that? So this right here was, I want to say it's from the book of Revelation. There's a church called Smyrna. And look at that column. Look how big that is. So I want to say this picture was probably excavated like in the 1800s. But you look at these columns. How did this stuff get buried so deeply? Like pictures like that.
Yeah, wow.
See those people at the bottom here? See how tiny they are?
Yeah.
So here's another example. So like what we see now with like modern things that have been dug out, but you see how big those columns are and you see everything. That's why you see like a lot of modern buildings. They have basements that don't really look like basements. They look like other floors because there's windows that are bricked up later. You see stuff like this, where this is where the street was. They dug down, excavated, and they found out the building went down a whole floor more. But there's examples of this all over the place where things are under the ground that were obviously once above the ground. So how did that happen? But I'm saying like that significant to me is it's mostly about like this kind of stuff where these are where these churches once were in the book of Revelation. And now they're no longer there because those people, those church bodies don't exist anymore. There's no like historical tradition where they're still waiting for Jesus to come back. Like they were buried So all 7 churches basically had to be excavated in modern day Turkey. And to me, that's a big deal. It's like, okay, so what happened to them? So if Jesus said he was coming soon to them and to be faithful to me and you're going to get the crown of life, he tells one church that he's going to keep them from the hour of testing. What happened if what does it mean if he didn't come back to them? And then they eventually were buried under the ground. Does Christianity spread like it does if that's how the story ends? You know, if you really think about it, like in the way that what we're told historically in Christianity, that the early church was fed to lions, they were decapitated, they were used by Nero as Roman candles to light his streets, be tied to a stake and burned. Okay, so if this is the story of Christianity, and eventually John writes a letter to these people, and they all end up dying in some kind of cataclysm, like how does Christianity continue to spread? Because if you really do look, that the imminency of the return of Christ is all throughout the Gospels, all throughout the epistles. So these people believed it. And if it never came true, I said I have a hard time believing that we're still here talking about Christ today. You wouldn't have had the Gothic cathedrals and all the iconography. You wouldn't have had it spread to pagan Rome if there wasn't some kind of a thing to validate it. That's my belief anyways. But yeah, then you eventually get into something else, and it's called, we like to term it as meltology. And meltology is really fascinating for me because you have another place. I think this is really interesting because in another place in modern day Turkey, Peter in his epistle mentions this place where a church was historically, and it's called Cappadocia, Turkey. And just look at this place. Does that not look like a place that looked like it got melted? It looks like what we're told historically is that this was people carved into a mountain. But to me, it looks more like a place got absolutely smoked.
Like Sodom and Gomorrah type stuff?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Like places like
this.
Meltology,
is that? Oh, yeah, I've been there. That's in Turkey. Myra.
Yeah. Well, again, so this was a very important part of, the Byzantine Empire, Roman Empire. And there's so many examples of this place that look like that place got melted. You know what I mean? Like I don't know how anybody can see it any different way. That this is both super advanced looking, but it's also it got wrecked at some point because they didn't obviously carve part of it in like that. Like what is that? You know what I'm saying? Like there's evidence all around the world of things like this. And nobody ever stops to say, like, how did that happen?
So, okay, I have a question then.
Sure.
So if you're believing in it's Satan's little season, so the Antichrist would have been and gone. Jesus, of course, has been and gone.
Mm-hmm.
So really, like, this is a time much worse than the Antichrist. Now we're kind of dealing with the big guy, right? We're dealing with the main boss.
Well, not necessarily, because Jesus said the tribulation was going to be the worst time the world had ever seen and ever will see. So that's kind of interesting, like to think about the way it's written too, is that the way we think of the end of the world is really not what the Bible's describing as the end of the world. Well, I think what actually a better translation is what Jesus is saying is the end of the age. Because if you really think about it, like we watch movies all the time where the world ended, but they're still living after the time the world ended. So I think some people think that, oh gosh, we can't be there because the world ends. It's like, but Jesus said it's going to be the worst time before and after this time. So there's a world after this time. And what it actually specifically says that it's going to be the worst time during this time where probably that was formed. This thing was smoked and melted. I think that, here's another example. We're living in a deceptive time. But as far as like persecution of Christians and what God's people are going to experience is not as bad as the tribulation anyways.
This. Yeah. Okay.
But I mean, isn't that wild? I mean, like, I don't know how people can look at that and say that's normal.
Yeah, and if there's not really much actual history on these places, I mean, I can't speak to all of them, obviously, but there's very little history. I went to the one in Turkey, and it really didn't explain like why they would go through all that trouble to make it, and then just leave it there, and just a lot of like unanswered questions. It seemed.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm just saying, like, we can isolate it to the biblical locations, and that's what I like to do, just because I like to make the case biblically that Turkey was such a significant place, and so Turkey housed all the churches that were buried under the ground, and it has all these places that there's examples of people living in the earth in caves. I want to say that there's a place in Turkey, I forgot exactly where it's called. It might be somewhere near Cappadocia, that they found an underground dwelling place that up to 20,000 people could live.
Yeah.
Well, think about it like this. So we have melted things, we got buried things, and then we have places where we have evidence that people lived under the ground. Well, Jesus says in Revelation chapter 6, he said that the tribes of the earth are going to mourn, and they're going to hide from the face of the wrath of the Lamb. And they're going to be hiding amongst the rocks in the earth, in the caves. So there's examples of that actually really taking place.
Yeah.
But like historically, yeah, because you really think about it, a lot of people have made the point that if you want to save your civilization, if you're fighting an enemy, like an enemy army, the last place you'd ever want to do is tie yourself off into this cave system with like one opening, because you would be really screwed if they found the opening for that cave.
Sure.
So maybe they weren't trying to hide from other men. Maybe they were trying to hide from a threat from heaven. You know what I mean? Maybe the men were of one mind to hide from this. Because yeah, like if somebody plugged that opening, or they smoked the people out, you know what I mean? Like flooded it.
Yeah, you're screwed. Yeah.
Yeah, that would strategically, it makes no sense. But yet there's examples of seeing people had done this. So there's melted things, buried things. And yeah, if you actually look historically, where it really kind of ties the whole thing together is that there's a time called 536 AD, where historians write about this being the worst time in all of human history. The sun does not give its light for 18 months. It's followed by a mini ice age. There's wars and famines at the same time. And then eventually you have something called the Justinian plague, which is basically like the bubonic plague, where up to 50 to 90% of Europe could have died of this plague. I mean, that to me sounds like the four horsemen of the apocalypse at one time. And that to me, like, people would probably the first thing they probably think is like, well, that's interesting, but why is that so disconnected? If Jesus came back in the first century, why are we talking about this? Well, I think this is how the devil distorts things, is that you can't hide events like this out of human history. But what you could do possibly is you could stretch out some of these events on a timeline that make it seem like it's disconnected from what the book of Revelation is saying. But I mean, the sixth seal, when Christ returns, the sun does not give its light. The moon turns to blood. The stars from heaven don't give their light anymore. 18 months of darkness. And so, yeah, it's really interesting. There's some kind of an alternative, I guess, timeline theorist. Like there's this German researcher was named Gunnar Heinzen, and he concluded that all the events, like the first 1,000 years of the millennia AD, 700 years were added. There's other kind of timeline theorists that think up to 1,000 years have been added to our timeline, like since the first century. So what if those events of 536 actually took place closer to maybe even 79 AD, the decade when the temple was destroyed? I think that those things fit together, and I think those could be kind of your hidden things that hidden in like kind of in plain sight that could have taken place that have distorted how we basically even date time.
Yeah. I mean, like, especially whenever I saw those underground cities too. Like the first thing would always go to my mind was like, that's what I'd do if I had a threat from above. If there was some kind of that would kind of be like the logic. But
Well, if you think about it, like even today, so we have all these celebrities building bunkers. There's all these shows about this too. So if you're familiar with that game Fallout, there's a show on Amazon Prime about it now. So what do? They built these things called vaults, but they're just really just underground bunkers because there's going to be some man-made cataclysm. Everybody's going to start nuking each other. Right, and then you have this post-apocalyptic world afterwards. And there's a show I want to say now it's on I think it's on Hulu, I believe. It was called Paradise. They had a season. The first season I think was last year. But it was all about that there was going to be this super volcano in Antarctica, and then eventually the countries of the world were going to have this problem with like its resources, so they were going to start nuking each other. And so what they did was they built a city under a mountain in Colorado. So it's less about them trying to worry about each other. It's more about like, that if bombs drop, you build a bunker. So it's not necessarily about like, because you don't want to defend a city like that, but you just don't want, a threat from the heavens to come get you. So what were they worried about in the first century to do that?
Right. Yeah. So, okay. So when do you put, so it's 1,000 years. That's the end of now Jesus, and it's the start of the little season. When do you put on the timeline when it started?
Let me flesh out that idea about the Gunnar Heinsohn a little bit more. Okay, so here's why I believe the timeline's distorted. What he did was, he's a German researcher and sociologist, historian. What he did was he was examining the strata layers. So for most people who don't know what I'm talking about, it's just the layers of the dirt in the earth.
So right, when you see the multicolors and stuff.
Right. Or it'd be like if you lived in a town that's 200 years old, you would, a lot of times you see older buildings or newer buildings built on older foundations. Like they demoed a place, but they kept some of it. So like the more you dug down, you could find older stuff, which is true today because again, they don't build as many basements as they used to, but there's lots of old basements. So if you dug down deeper, you would find older stuff. Now, here's the real issue when you get into like times like what they call like the Dark Ages, which would be like 300 to like 1300 AD, maybe 500 to 1500. The dates vary, which I think is really kind of suspicious in itself. But maybe it fits all into this, is that what he did when he was examining 30,000 different Roman sites, that what we're told is they had buildings built in early antiquity, which would be like basically like first, second AD, like first and second century. And then obviously you get into like mid antiquity and late antiquity. Well, we're told historically that in mid antiquity, they started building buildings in a Renaissance style of the first century. And this is the theme. And then in the late antiquity, like in the 900 range, like the 9th century, 9th and 10th century, they were again building stuff in a Renaissance style of the first century. So that's why the Roman architecture is always really consistent the way it looks, because we're told they kept on repeating the same design of the first century. Now, he discovered the anomaly, though, is that the fact that if you have 1,000 years of construction, you would have lots of examples of that in the strata, you'd have things built lower down. So if you'd expect to find at least 3 periods of like construction of like in the strata layers. But he said instead they're all at the same strata level. Everything's built in the exact same way, the exact materials, and it's built on the exact same strata level. So there's 3 collapses of Europe and I guess Mesopotamia written on record. There's one of like with the barbarian tribes in like the early antiquity, mid antiquity. I mentioned that time of 536, and late antiquity. There's a collapse in Northern Europe, and it's some other kind of cosmic event. Gunnar Heinsohn concluded that they were all the same event, and that's where kind of our timeline it's broken. And this is likely where you get the AD chronology, when people for thousands of years, we're dating things differently. Now, what I find really fascinating is that what a lot of modern researchers point to is that what could have caused the sun to go dark for 18 months, because it's not written about. Nobody knows why. They believe it could have been volcanoes. Maybe one super volcano, maybe a bunch of them. But did you ever know that the very first volcanic activity on record was Mount Vesuvius, destruction of Pompeii? Out of all the volcanoes, like you think about, like we've been shown depictions of volcanoes since we're like a kid, like dinosaurs running around, active volcanoes and stuff.
Yeah.
The very first historical volcanic eruption was Mount Vesuvius. So this is the exact same time period that the Romans destroyed Jerusalem, that a volcano cooks a corrupt Roman city. So what if that volcano was the start of the events that blotted out the sun? I don't know. To me, that kind of makes sense. That again, you might have fire coming from below, you have fire coming down from above. It's kind of almost like a mirror of the story of Noah, where the firmament opens and then all this water comes in, but it also says the fountains of the deep opened up, and then the water came from below too. So what if you had volcanoes barfing out molten rock, and then you also have fire coming down from heaven? Could that explain what took place in places like Cappadocia, Turkey?
Yeah. And I said this to Brian too, but the only other thing, like the thing that like popped straight into my head, was this idea, and it's only a theory, but it's that whole Younger Dryas impact theory too. Raining down of meteorites, which just blot out everything.
Well, yeah, that's certainly possible. I want to say that what some people believe, because there's the collapse in Northern Europe in around the 9th century, some people attribute it to maybe a comet. So,
wow.
So a lot of the things, but I guess the truth is, like, nobody really knows. But I think that's again, that's a more the absence of good history about these times, to me, is actually kind of telling, because if you do look up, if you guys on your own, you guys, and I don't think anybody should just trust me. So just please do your own research about this stuff, especially biblically. But if you look up 536, I could only find 3 people would put their name by what happened. I think it's like John of Ephesus. There's somebody named the Assyriac. I forget the guys' names. But the funny part about it is like you have 5 maybe historical accounts from this time where the sun did not give its light for 18 months. You really think about how many people would write about that today. How many people? Billions. Billions of people would write about it. I mean, they're not all historians, but the point is, you'd be able to find manuscripts of people writing back and forth of if the sun went dark today for 18 months, it would be the biggest story ever.
So just so I follow everything, and are you saying Pompeii is the start of the little season?
No, I'm saying that could have been the start of like God's wrath. Tribulation was coming around that time where there was persecution of the church. Pompeii, if that erupted, could have been blotted out the sun. Then you have what you have in the book of Revelation. You have the trumpets, where all these judgments from God, the trumpets, and you also have the bowls of wrath, which are like cataclysmic events where, things like it sounds like a meteorite lands in the sea, a burning mountain, cosmic events, worldwide, just earth-changing events. So I think that's what could have taken place. And so what I was just saying is that what I find just really interesting about that is like that you don't have more written about that. Like there's not good history of that time, because that would have been the thing that everyone would want to know about. Like that would be the thing that would be worth chronicling. But literally there's only like a couple lines or two from like a couple supposed historians. And so what I believe based on this, and this is Gunnar Heidson's conclusions, if you take 700 years out of the first 1,000, basically you move our what we call our first century up into like the 700s. So maybe like year 0 is year 700 in this timeline. So that puts like the life and ministry of Jesus, you have it probably right in the 730s, right? He gets crucified, let's say 733. 40 years later, Jerusalem's destroyed. So that would put us in the 770s. So if you just think about it like that, then you have 1,000 years, right? Well, yeah, if you think about it like, so 3.5 year tribulation, so it puts us like right around 17.7, like it's like 776. So if you add 1,000 years to that, like would you have your millennial reign?
Right.
The start of the little season could maybe be 1,1776. That's what some people have. That's kind of what a lot of people's working best guess is, because you really think about like the revolutions around the world, obviously in America, followed by a revolution in France, followed by a revolution in Europe or in Russia. Just think of the idea of like you had a Christian monarchies that were connected very closely with the church. And the one thing these revolutions have in common is they're upending these Christian monarchies. Now, this is not to say that these Christian monarchies were perfect or even good, but it is like the system had been totally just turned on its head at that point. And you think about like we in this community often point to like the symbolism. People talk about their symbolism being their downfall. Well, think about the symbolism of the Statue of Liberty, where a lot of people have noticed at some point saying, kind of got like a manly face, right? It kind of looks, does that really look like a lady? I mean, the body's certainly a lady. But then if you look at historic paintings and statues of Apollo and Helios and Lucifer, and they all got that same face. And so one thing that's really kind of curious about the Statue of Liberty in Liberty Island in New York City is that there's this chain around the ankle that's broken. And you're like, why would a Statue of Liberty have a chain around its ankle? And so people have wondered, what if that's symbolic of like the devil's chains being broken? And if you think about like the whole idea of like the Dark Ages, well, what we're told is during this Dark Ages, you had this 1,000 years of a Christian empire, the Byzantine Empire. It was like the Roman Empire converted into Christianity, morphed into something called the Byzantine Empire, and ruled for 1,000 years. Well, isn't it interesting to think that for Christians, that would not have been a dark time? But if the devil was in a pit for 1,000 years, it would have been really dark for someone. And then after that time, what do they call it? The Enlightenment, right? And so what happens during the Enlightenment? Christianity starts to wane. People start to have more of a secular worldview, ideas about the existence of God, the heliocentric model, everything about the Bible being, basically put to skepticism. You eventually get theories like evolution. And it's like, so that's what the world is viewing as enlightenment. So then you go to the Statue of Liberty and it says light illuminating the world, or liberty illuminating the world. So you think about like the idea that, so who is the one who's like the light bearer,
right?
Who brings illumination? Apollo or Lucifer. And so we're saying, what if that is kind of what they're showing us? And if you really think about the way history is being taught to, especially in America, we don't really have much history past like 1776. So we don't really go much further back. We hear about Columbus in 1492 and all the stuff about the colonization by the Europeans to Americas. But we're not really told much else outside of that little part of the story. Maybe the Pilgrims, then we get to the Revolution, and then we hear about our history. But it feels like that's the history that they want us to focus on, not the stuff that's in the Dark Ages. But truth be told, there's really no history from the Dark Ages. And that's one of the reasons they call it that. Because language, culture, and architecture did not advance for 1,000 years, which I find not credible.
Yeah.
Does not make sense.
Oof. Damn. where do I go from this? That's it's just a lot to take in, because yeah, I mean, if we're in his reign, and for sure, we've seen this, just like we've all collectively moved further, especially like, my generation for sure. We've collectively collectively moved further and further away from the church, from religion. Degeneracy is just all too common. The chain on the ankle too, that one, again, like, why? Because that would have taken hours of work. So why have that feature in there and it's not explained or anything? Very weird. Very, very weird.
I want to clarify one thing though.
Sure.
I don't call Satan's little season his reign, because I believe that the Christ kingdom is forever. It's eternal. Now, but I think it's interesting. It's just the way that it's even phrased, is that you have Satan's little season. He goes out and deceives. And to me, it actually makes more sense, like how things are viewed today. Because basically, if you go back to kind of a first century worldview, you would have had a pantheon of gods. You had the god of gods would have been Jupiter or Zeus, right? And he was the head god of the gods. And then you have other worship of his son Apollo. Then you have like his daughter Artemis, and you have like different examples of like the pantheons of gods. But like Zeus is kind of like the big bad, or he's like the big god for them. I believe that the Bible gives strong indications that that is the devil, because it says in Pergamos, Turkey, that that's where Satan's throne was. Historically, that there was this altar to Zeus that looks just like a throne. Interesting, it's actually in modern day Berlin now. It had to be excavated, taken apart, and they put it back together in a museum in Berlin. So again, it's kind of interesting, like kind of early 20th century, they take Satan's throne and they move it to the center of Europe.
Right.
I don't know. That's kind of interesting. But it's kind of like that he did not hide himself then. He wanted to be openly worshipped, sacrificed to. But now we live in a time where the devil is pulling the strings of the elite. I definitely agree with that. But they don't really acknowledge it, or they don't openly acknowledge it. It's like they do with a wink and a nod, but it's kind of all done through deception. And of course, that makes more sense that these ancient mythologies that people believed about these gods, now we're told, oh, no, they never really believed it. That was just fiction. These were just superstitious people. It wasn't actually real. And so that now we can still do movies like Clash of the Titans, and people can worship, like Thor through idolatry and, through comic books. But we're always told, well, it's just a fun story. It's just for fun.
Right.
Well, the people,
and everyone's. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying people back then didn't view it like that. They viewed it as, I also don't think these people were so just stupid and superstitious. I believe that they understood what a myth meant back then. It would be like probably how like a lot of people treat the Bible. I mean, I believe that it's real history, but I know a lot of people just say, oh, well, it's a good moral story. And whether these people were actually real or not, it's still supposed to get you some understanding about how we're supposed to live. I think that they probably thought the same thing, where it's like, well, they weren't there, so they don't know how it all worked. But today, yeah, the devil, that whole kind of meme of the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist. Right. I think that that's what is taking place, where it's like, because if he showed himself, well, then the opposite would obviously ring true to people. It's like, oh, so if the devil's real, then Jesus is real, God is real. So right. He would rather just kind of hide in the gray areas, and he'd rather fool people and just distort what's true and corrupt the things that God had made good.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's what it is. The first step to kind of any kind of spirituality, and I really hate these terms. I'm someone who has an engineering background. I try to be as realistic and based in the real world. But the acknowledgement of evil really does lead you on the path to, if that exists, then there has to be the counterbalance. There has to be good in the world too.
Back here real quick though. So see, broken chain.
Right.
Isn't that weird though? Like, you wouldn't expect that, would you?
And like that would have taken like hours, if not days, of sculpting, and like so much extra work for this small detail, right? Like why go through all that extra effort? It's very weird.
And it's definitely something that people don't talk about.
Right.
Like you're right. If you think, let's just say the person who did it, they would have done it for a reason, and it would have been worth talking about. That'd be part of like the, like the presentation of like going there and look what they did, and this took this long, but this is what this artist felt this needed to be shown here.
Don't look at this bit.
Well, the thing is, you probably can't. You can only see it from a very, very certain vantage point.
I saw it from the boat once. So yeah, not up close. But
could you see the chain?
I mean, I'm a teenager at this point, but I think I was just looking up. I was focused on the top. So, you're at an angle. I don't even know if you can, to be honest with you.
Yeah, and then if you go look at this, so this is a very famous. Let me show you this. This is a very famous statue of Lucifer here. What do you know? Kind of interesting that he's got this chain right here.
Right.
So, just saying that him and the statues of Lucifer and Statue of Liberty look very similar.
So what? I guess, one, it's really weird that this 1776, that's literally printed on your dollar bill as well.
Yeah, and it says Novus Ordo Seclorum, which is New Order of the Age. What does that mean?
Right.
It's got the Illuminati eyeball on there and everything. It's like, that's not suspicious or anything.
Well, and this, I can't help but then tie it back into Israel, because like the whole Freemason thing, there's ties with, and that's all about kind of like linked to King Solomon's temple, right?
Mm-hmm.
You've heard of that? And
100%. That all that esoteric mystery school stuff is always about bringing in this new age, and it really is interesting to think about, like, just like the concept of like the new age religion. What does that mean? I think most people have never really done any kind of digging on what are they actually talking about? I think what they're talking about is some kind of a zodiac alignment, some astronomical time, where we move out of this one time and we move into this different time, right? And then so we move into the age of Aquarius or something like that, and that's supposed to mean something to somebody. Well, I mean, to some people it does mean a lot. You get into like the Lester Crowleys of the world, and he was saying we're moving out of the age of Christ and moving into this time of Horus. Horus is like the new, and so Horus, like historically, would have been like, you have this kind of unholy trinity where you have Isis, Osiris, and the sun being Horus. And so like that he's kind of like this replacement for Christ. He's like, he's on the pagan side, he's the opposite. And that's why that I know that the people like who promote like the zeitgeist, they'd probably say, oh, well, Jesus is just another one of these sacred trinities. But no, his story is different. But no, but I do think it's interesting, like we are moving toward this certain time, and it's like, you really think about, like, even when we went through like the COVID stuff, they kept on saying normal's not coming back. This is the new normal is here,
right.
And it was like all in unison. It was like so creepy. Like, what do you guys mean? But they have had this idea, and you can hear the speeches from these guys who are like George H. Bush. George Bush was in Skull and Bones, his sons as well. And he was talking about this new time, and they have like this secret destiny. Think like Manly P. Hall has like this secret destiny of America. It's like, it does seem like that they have this belief. And I think a lot of it does have to do with that you have this Kabbalistic infiltration of these secret societies. And then it goes through like the Rothschilds for the Balfour Declaration, and then the modern founding of the state of Israel. Yeah, and this idea again of like another Solomon's temple, or like something like that. They have this belief, and I do believe that that's why a lot of people are viewing the things that are taking place in the Middle East as biblical prophecy, like from the book of Daniel, from the book of Revelation. But what it really looks like to me at this point, it seems like they're trying to manifest these things. Like, these things don't seem organic. That's why, again, like when the Bible never talks about a third temple, because there's already a temple there. The Bible never talks about a one world government, because there's already a one world government in the book of Revelation. Like, people, It's like people miss the obvious right there. There's already a temple. They're looking for a one world religion. They've already got one. The Romans ruled everything, right? Like that's when they describe the beast and they describe the harlot being Jerusalem, the beast being the empire of Rome. It's like, who can make war against the beast? Who can fight against the beast? Nobody could fight Rome in the first century. So like that's the context. But now it seems like that there's an effort to rebuild Rome. There's an effort to rebuild, I guess, the great harlot, and build all the things that were once in Jerusalem. But I think that it's not like that they know exactly where they are in the timeline either. Because again, the devil's deceiving even his own, right? Especially his own. So I think a lot of these events where, people get into like the idea of like the red heifers, that somehow getting red cows is moving us closer to the end times. Doesn't it feel like that this is a little bit, like a bit of like theater at this point? Like, they're not actually building a temple. We're talking about getting red cows. It's like, are we really moving the goalpost a little bit? Or it'd be much harder to actually, I don't know, maybe move the Dome of the Rock to build a temple there than it would be to get some red cows to sacrifice them and have some kind of purity ritual. It seems like theater, but it's obviously what they've done a good job is they've convinced evangelicals in America and probably Great Britain too that wars in the Middle East are actually not a bad thing, because this can lead to the return of Jesus in the rapture. So modern evangelicals will see, World War III. That actually might be a good thing for me. When for us, you're just like, are you guys with you?
Yeah. It goes into Machiavellianism. This idea that the ends justify the means. So hey, as long as we get this, the second coming, it's all good. But like,
right, well, it's like that's what it is. It's like a Faustian bargain where it's like, well, they get a temple and we get Jesus to come back.
Right.
Let's not talk about the part in the book of Zechariah where it says that 2/3 of the city, everybody's going to be killed there. That's what it said. Like, so that they don't want to talk about these other prophecies that are like that. Like, why does, like, it's almost like trying to understand, like, so why is there an end times? Why does God cause judgment on places? Because it's a terrible time when it takes place. And it's like these people, like at some point, men's hearts have become so corrupt that they won't repent. So what happens? There's judgments against like a great white throne, but there's also earthly judgments where God would send an army in to destroy people, or he could send in fire from heaven. He could send a natural disaster to destroy people. So the point is that the way you look at the modern state of Israel, in complete rebellion against God biblically, right? That if they don't accept his son, well, then they're not in good stead with God. So if God decided to come back and judge this place right now, what would happen to those people? You know what I mean? So it's like, it's a very cynical view to be able to say, yeah, let's promote them getting a third temple so then they can get their Antichrist, right? That's basically what modern evangelicals will say without saying it, except for some of them like Greg Locke and people like that will openly advocate for a third temple so Jesus can come back. Not just just kind of brushing past the part where, God's going to smoke Jerusalem when that happens.
Yeah, which if you're a Christian, it makes no sense. If you are truly trying to bring the kingdom to earth, like you're doing the exact opposite.
Absolutely.
But yeah. I mean, I guess it leans into, like you say, if modern Judaism, Talmudic Judaism, if they've already rejected Christ, if there's these passages which say that he's burning in excrement for all eternity, it leans more and more into this idea that it's satanic,
Well, it also makes sense to me that there's like only one religion in the whole world that hates Jesus. Not all of them acknowledge him as being God in the flesh, but of course, there's only one that really does that. But then a lot of these other religions would say, oh, well, Jesus was a prophet, according to Islam. And like Hindus and Taoists, like Buddhists, they would say that Jesus was actually one of these ascended masters. He was an enlightened person. He was a great teacher. But then you have one that's saying that, yeah, like literally he's in hell burning in excrement. And then you kind of see who's trying to undermine the West. He's who's trying to undermine Christianity. And it's all about them. And it's eventually like the way they interpret, I guess, the Old Testament, and eventually like through their Talmud, is the idea that we are basically Rome, we're Edom, and then we're going to be destroyed at the end of this. I mean, it's actually really frightening that how people miss this is that they openly call Goyim, the Westerners, the Gentiles, they call us subhuman. They call us Amalek. They call us Edomites, like in the line of Esau, and they call us Rome. Yeah, Benjamin Netanyahu was carrying around a book called about like, I think it was like called like the Second Battle versus Rome, where he was saying that they're going to win this time. And then you can hear them in later speeches. They say, "Who's Rome?" Well, Rome's America and Europe. And so these people are supposedly our greatest ally. Even they're openly advocating that they're going to destroy us one day. And I think that when you see how things have gone over the last 75 years, they have been destroying us, but from within. Like they're not going to destroy us through like the Samson option or like launching missiles at us. They are going to undermine us from the inside. And I think that that's clearly anybody who's actually open, has eyes to see that's happening. It's through subversion. Yeah, it's absolutely.
Yeah. And I mean, they call the Palestinians Amalek too. So
well, they call all their enemies that. They, like I said, they literally dehumanize their enemies, and then then you can do whatever you want with them. And that pretty much goes along with all the secret society stuff. Is that they're the enlightened ones, right? So then the rest of people are just basically like cattle. They're animals.
Oh, I don't know if you've seen this. Have you ever Googled 100% of Thai workers?
Mm-mm.
Okay, just as a little experiment, let's do this real quick.
Okay.
I'll tell you what, I'll share. Okay, here we go. 100% on a report.
Thai migrant workers in Israel agriculture. So 100% of their agricultural workers are from Thailand?
No, but of the Thai workers, 100% of the female Thai agricultural workers surveyed reported being sexually assaulted. 100%. And I got another one for you. 61% of Israeli men. 61% of Israeli men surveyed did not consider forced sex with an acquaintance to be rape. It's like what's going on there, you know?
Well, that's why they always. You really feel like again, like the indoctrination that we've had to deal with over our whole lives, where that whole concept of Judeo-Christian values, those values are not my values. Those values are not Christian. It's like literally, it's like this is an oxymoron. You know, like this does not make sense together.
Yeah, and you know what? 500 years ago, we would have been absolute, and like England kicked Jews out, you know, and all of these Christian countries actively kicked them out. Is that a Judeo-Christian, foundation?
Well, right, that's the thing. It's like the historic church did not view Zionism as anything but heresy. So we look at things again. It's very difficult to look at things without our preconceived biases based on the way that we've been taught over our whole lives. So saying a lot of these things, I know that a lot of people. I mean, I can't even imagine actually talking openly like this on a podcast 5 years ago.
It's true,
because we have been able to say more. But I mean, if you look at it though, that time, we've been put in shackles as far as our minds go over our whole lifetimes of like what we're allowed to think, and if we're horrible people for finding these things out. So yeah, when you look at the history of even people like the Protestant church, like Martin Luther, look what he wrote about the Jews. You'll be horrified if you call yourself a Protestant after you read what he wrote. But was he wrong? I mean, he might not have been right about everything, but you think but he had his reasons.
Right.
Historically, when you look up 109 countries, it's like, were they all the bad guys in that situation?
That's it.
I mean, at some point they allowed him to come in.
Well, and I mean, in England,
they did. But I mean, I guess the point is like that. I think the real interesting part about that is like the whole diaspora of like the Jews being spread out around Europe. It's like that they always considered themselves a sovereign people amongst the country they lived in, and so they really never assimilated to the countries they were in, and they did not want to help the country they were in, and so they viewed the diaspora around the different places as they're still their countrymen and not the people, not their neighbors. Yeah. And as I said earlier, I don't care who you are. If you do that, you're not benefiting the place you're in. And if you find out that they're a net drag on the place you're in because they really do not have your neighbor's best interest. And I think that that's the interesting part about like Christianity is it's like we're not naive, but maybe we are a little bit. Like, you know what I mean? Like I don't know you. I want to believe the best about you. Like I want to give you the benefit of the doubt. But then you have other people who are obviously not worthy of the benefit of the doubt. But who, like, is it from me to decide who is not?
Sure.
And I think it's like at some point, like we want the benefit of the doubt. And I think that, the golden rule biblically, treat others how you'd want to be treated. So we try to do that. And then that gets used against us. But I mean, it's kind of like, isn't it kind of what they show you in the movies? That the good guys are not willing to compromise certain things, and that's what makes them weak to the enemy. But I mean, I think that ultimately we know that, our example is Christ is like that we know we're going to be betrayed. He knew he was going to be betrayed. But we still continue to do it. It's like, are we doing that because we're stupid, or are we doing that because we are, again, we're like, we understand that this is not all that there is. So I guess I would rather be tricked than treat somebody horribly because I was so cynical, right? And it's kind of like the idea of like, I mean, how many bad people would you let go free versus locking up or executing an innocent person? Like how many innocent people would be worth executing or locked up for life would you be willing to deal with in order to maybe not let the bad guys go? If like for like a moral person, that's a real question you might have to ask. And I think that's what we do in the West. But yeah, we do kind of look like the Charlie Brown meme, like kicking the football and Lucy just yanking that thing back. Maybe it'll work out different. Those other 190 times wasn't enough for you to get it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think we're at that point now where we still try and strive to be morally right, and that's one of our best qualities. But we also we need boundaries. We need to stand up for ourselves. If not for us, for other people, right? For our families,
for our children, yeah.
Exactly. So we still need to be protective. We still need to make things secure. And really, like, if they're going to label us this or that, it just doesn't matter, because when you look at priorities, the families, the country, the people who mean well, they are worth more than whatever punishment I'm going to get individually.
True. And Jesus said, "Woe to you when all men speak well of you." So their fathers spoke well of the false prophets. So Jesus said that you'll be hated by all nations for my name's sake. It's like, if you're telling the truth, you're not going to get just flowers all the time. People are going to hate you for it. So I think sometimes it's like that the truth is uncomfortable to a lot of people, right? It's uncomfortable to this world. It's uncomfortable in a system that's basically built out of lies. So that's why, again, we talked about like conspiracy theorists. It's like those people, conspiracy theorists is like a pejorative. It was installed by 3-letter agencies who were obviously controlled by secret societies that were meant to basically make people who question their lies as the crazy people. Well, now we know, but we know we can look back and we can see that kind of stuff. So now that the idea is like that, of course, you're going to get called a crackpot. You're going to get called racist. You're going to get called antiseptic. You're going to get called all those things if you start talking about some of these things. But of course you will. I mean, like I said, the Bible said it would be just like that.
Yeah. Hey, that is a perfect place to wrap up. JT, firstly, thank you so much. And also, where's the best place to get hold of you or find your content?
I would say I put the majority of my effort these days over on YouTube. So I have a couple of weekly podcasts over there. And yeah, if you like the shorter stuff, you can find me over on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. Also, if you like to listen to podcasts, you're just driving around, you got Spotify or Apple or wherever you can hear podcasts, you can look me up, look up JT's mixtape. Otherwise, you can find me at JT Follows JC pretty much everywhere. X, all the things basically.
Awesome. JT, thank you so much. Really appreciate this.
Yeah, man. It was a great conversation. Thank you for having me.
So if you made it this far, again, thanks very much. This last one I had actually on religion. Please let me know what you want me to talk about, because I'm open to all options, whether that be a specific guest or a specific topic. As always, if you're watching on YouTube, please share and subscribe. And if you're watching on Spotify, please give it a 5-star review. It really helps push the content out there. Ultimately, the whole point of this is to make people more aware. For me, I think I want to push it more towards nationalism, what's happening in the UK, what's in the West. But again, I'm open to ideas. And on top of that, because of the topics I talk about, I've now been demonetized on more or less every platform. So there is a link for Buy Me a Coffee. If you do want to support me on that, it means the world to me. If you just want to watch the content and comment, like, subscribe, again, this also means the world to me. Either way, thank you. Anyways, I hope to see you next time. Enjoy.